Welcome to Pandas Nightmares. In today's video, you will hear some stories from scientists who believe some things in their field are true, but cannot prove it. If you do like my content, do like and subscribe, as it will help me grow. I am creating content to try to raise funds for my dad's treatment. So if you want to support his ongoing battle, the GoFundMe link is in the description section below. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And now, let's get started. Enjoy. Story 1. Paleontology. Darwin's dilemma refers to the absence of known macroscopic fossils, i.e., excluding microbial stuff, from beneath the base of the Cambrian period, i.e., older than 541 million years. When he was first describing his theory of evolution, everyone, including Darwin, expected that when fossils were found from before the Cambrian period, that they would be the ancestors of modern animals. Then when those fossils were found, Edikara biota, we call them, after the Edikara Hills in South Australia, they were enthusiastically classified as ancient jellyfish, ancient worms, etc. But it turns out that's a load of crap. Consensus is growing that almost none of those classifications were accurate. Instead, most Ediacaran organisms seem to have belonged to extinct groups unrelated to anything alive today. And they lived in a world that was so different from the following 540 million years. They had modes of life distinct from any living macroscopic organisms. We were so eager to make everything fit into our neat little evolutionary narrative that for decades we'd basically glossed over these crazy, alien sort of ecosystems that could be critical to understanding the origins of complex life on other planets as well as our own. We're still just beginning to really understand it though. It's a very controversial field of paleontology. Story 2. Chemistry. We will, eventually, be able to efficiently design enzymes to conduct complicated chemical transformations that would be otherwise impossible on unmodified substrates. A 2008 science paper, David Baker, Ken Helk, Forrest Michael, and a bunch of other awesome scientists showed proof of principle in designing a dialzalderase enzyme in silico. They designed the necessary transition state and the protein sequence that would form the corresponding active site, built the protein, and it catalyzed the exact reaction they intended to catalyze. It's beautiful work, and they've done a lot of incredible things since then. Scott Miller's group at Yale has done similar things using much smaller peptide catalysts to do site-specific modifications of things like vancomycin, which is a huge antibiotic, in a very selective manner. What does this mean? Taking, for example, the development of antibiotics, we're running into problems of resistance. Bugs are developing immunity to existing antibiotics. Even our last resorts like vancomycin are starting to fail. We can bypass these resistance mechanisms by modifying the antibiotics at certain positions, but this can be an incredibly difficult process. If we could design protein catalysts to promote the desired reaction on the unmodified antibiotic in a highly selective manner, we can make libraries of antibiotics efficiently that can tide us over until we develop some other manner of treating infections. Story 3. Psychology, psychiatry. There is ongoing discussion on the neurological and neurobiological correlates to depression. Psychiatry is focused on neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, because most antidepressants have effects on these transmitter systems and seem to help the patients over the course of many weeks. SSRIs take at least 3 weeks to show measurable non-placebo effects in patients. But, as a matter of fact, we still do not know why. A German psychiatrist now proposed a new model for depression, explaining it with a chronic overdose of cortisol, a hormone closely associated with stress. He was even able to treat patients with a cortisol antagonist successfully and within hours of treatment. Very short explanation of the theory, actually. His work has not been acknowledged very much until now, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is something true to it. Story 4. Classics. Archaeology. Ancient science. A little late to the game on this one, and I'm not exactly a scientist. But here's my weird fact that may be true, although is based on tenuous evidence. What we've found definitively in anthropological studies of cultures with a strong oral tradition, the one I'm familiar with, is studies of peoples in the Balkans, is that oral memory is a lot better in other cultures that rely less on writing. That, for instance, is why the Iliad and Odyssey could be passed down by oral tradition for centuries before they were written down, relatively intact. As a result of this, some scholars have made the case that the date of the fall of Troy is preserved in the Iliad and Odyssey, based on their descriptions of astronomical phenomena, some of which are more dubious readings than others. The date given by the astronomical dating lines up with the date archaeologists have determined for the destruction of Troy via, which the consensus of scholars accepts to be the Homeric Troy. Story 5. Neuroscience here, paraplegia, quadriplegia, or solved problems. We are already very good at recognizing patterns of activity measured through IG or other relatively non-invasive recording methods in real time and using this data to control various simple machines. The next step is expanding the scale so that, instead of controlling a computer mouse, a paralyzed individual controls legs or arms fluidly. Currently, the most well-known researcher adapting this technology to allowing paralyzed people to walk and move is Miguel Nicolas, who plans to construct an exoskeleton to allow a paralyzed person to kick a soccer ball at the World Cup. Soon, very soon, we will be able to make this feasible for real-world application. Beyond that, the entire field of brain-machine interface is booming. It is a natural adaptation of where neuroscience is, because it is not simple, but relatively so. Need to be able to recognize recurring patterns. You observe when an individual thinks or does something to be able to use those patterns to control machines. It's a fancy trick to allow thought control without really understanding why or how those thoughts exist in the first place. Very, very cool stuff. Story 6. Biomedical science. Giving Viagra to pregnant women will help combat obesity. It is well known in science that being born small or growth restricted is strongly correlated with later obesity, hypertension, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. These babies are ill-equipped for the calorie-rich world in which we live, and as a result their bodies preferentially store fat and essentially gobble up any glucose or fat that enters their bodies. A huge amount of the obesity we see today may be due to growth restriction. Viagra works by opening up the blood vessels in the penis to allow an erection. Viagra could similarly open up the blood vessels to the placenta and therefore the baby, providing them with more nutrients in the womb to help them grow. We're currently testing this theory in mice, rats, and sheep. Clinical trials in humans about to start. Story 7. Astronomy. There are these things called Lorimer bursts in radio astronomy. The first detected only a few years ago. Only 4 detections since. Basically, it's a huge burst of noise that asks for a few milliseconds and disappears. The reason BTW these are so weird is they're huge bursts of energy, and they come from about half the visible universe away from us. This should not happen, and no one really has an idea of how these things would be generated since right now there are no models for it. Anyway, people still don't know what they are. There's some discussion that it was a weather phenomenon for a while, and one telling thing is so far only Parkes. observatory in Australia where the dish was filmed has seen them, so everyone in radio astronomy is eager to be the person who spots one at a Knott Park's observatory. So my weirdest thing is these things are crazy mysterious, but I like to think they're real and from far away. What can I say? I'm a romantic who loves curveballs thrown at us in science, and we only barely have the technology to look for them. Plus, hey, it'd make a nice chapter in my thesis if I found one. Story 8. Psychiatry. There was a recent finding that 5 psychiatric disorders share some common genetic mutations related to voltage-gated calcium channel subunits in the brain. Voltage-gated calcium channels play a role in neurotransmitter release, which is why some medications that increase the amount of neurotransmitter in the synapse, such as SSRIs, seem to cure some psychiatric disorders for some people. This also might pose why electroconvulsive shock therapy works for some patients in treating their previously treatment-resistant depression. The shock activates the voltage-gated channels that are affected by the mutation. Psychiatry is probably one of the least understood areas of medicine. We still have no idea what truly causes mental disorders. Story 9. Cancer biology. As a few other biology people have pointed out, we're now very close to being able to practically cost-wise sequence genomes routinely in clinical practice. A large portion of cancer research going on now is focusing on how to take that sort of information, i.e. your cancer has these 56 mutations, and develop a therapy that is specific for you. The first proof of concept drug for this type of approach, known as personalized medicine, is elotinib, a drug that specifically shows action in patients with mutations in the EGFR gene. It's been in the clinic for several years now. In the near future, cancer physicians will have a whole suite of these sorts of targeted drugs, which work extremely well for a subset of patients, while having little side effect, to give in combinations dependent on which mutations are present in your cancer. This might be a little more than 10 years out, but it is exciting and will yield positive results all along the way. Story 10. Ecology, biology. The presence of culture in mammals has been documented in pods of orca whales. Culture in this context refers to behaviors that are passed down from generation to generation. With orca whales, we see this manifest as hunting techniques. Geographically distinct pods exhibit strikingly different hunting strategies. Certainly, the differences in these strategies arise mainly because of the differences between geographic regions. However, the idea of culture comes into play when new techniques are developed by individual whales within a pod. When a whale develops a new hunting technique, other whales take notice. If it is a significantly more successful technique, it will catch on more rapidly. Additionally, females teach hunting techniques to their young, passing on these techniques, much like alleles for different passed on. The idea of culture in mammals speaks to a level of intelligence that most people don't attribute to non-humans. For some, it is easy to believe that animals such as whales, dolphins, and chimpanzees could develop culture, but I believe it extends even further down the ladder of animal intelligence. I believe that even rodents such as squirrels, prairie dogs, and pika could exhibit distinct cultures, manifest as foraging or anti-predation behavior. I have studied a population of red squirrels in Colorado, and I firmly believe that their behavior is distinct enough from other red squirrel populations to support my beliefs regarding culture in mammals. That is all for today. If you have enjoyed this video, do like and subscribe. If you want to help in my dad's fundraiser, I would truly appreciate it. Hope you have an absolutely amazing day. You can also check my other videos on screen.